In this episode, we are joined by Leighton Bradfield. He's the co-founder of 20 Talk, a youth mental health charity. Leighton's story is a powerful one. He's doing incredible things with 20 Talk, and his perspectives on mental health and mindset are very refreshing. I love chatting with him, and we covered lots in this episode. Expect to learn about why he started 20 Talk, the biggest challenges and lessons of the journey, why introspection is so valuable, the gaps in the mental health space, why success is not always as it seems, how to have a hard conversation, why happiness needs sacrifice, plus so much more. This was such an enjoyable conversation and I love listening to his perspectives, so let's get into it. Leighton Bradfield, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So, take us back to the start, 2018. Why did you begin 20 Talk?
Look, so 20 Talk began, like you said, around 2018. Back at that point of life, I was a much different person to who I am today. A lot more immature emotionally and mentally. And I guess through my childhood or my teenage years, I was kind of engaging in the wrong side of the path and doing a little bit more drugs than I was supposed to be doing. And our whole group just kind of had this go out, get drunk, have a big party. And we did that for years. And it kind of got to a point where it was getting really bad. And we lost a few friends to suicide because that's the lifestyle we were living. And myself personally, I guess I was taking a few drugs to study, and I was taking stuff on the weekends for just to party, and I really wanted to fit in. I just wanted to be this person who was good at school, who was good, in the party scene, who was popular. And that just came all crashing down once we lost our friends. After we lost the first friend, we got together, and then at the funeral, and then at the second funeral, there was people there from the first. The person who passed away was at the funeral from the first person, and that just kind of really shocked Lockie and myself. So Lockie's the co-founder of 20 Talk, along with myself, and we came together and we said, "Look, this is fucked. We can't lose another friend. We actually have to do something about it. Because if we don't do something, who's going to do it?" And there's another story I don't really tell many people. In fact, I don't tell many people at all. But after we lost the second friend, I was walking home on Mummy and Av down the road here. And I just had this moment where I literally dropped to the floor. And I just dropped to the floor. And prior to that moment, I'd always been involved in businesses since I was 15. I had my own business. And I really wanted to make lots of money. I studied property development at university. I was selling chargers at school. That was kind of how I operate, and I was actually good at it. And so in that moment when I dropped to the floor, prior to that moment, I was like, yeah, make money, be successful. And when that moment happened, something just said mental health was so clear. Everything that I ever wanted to do in life just spun 180 and said mental health. I was like, what the fuck? I wasn't a really spiritual person at that time, or didn't really know what happened. So pretty much I just called my dad. I was like, I don't know what just happened to me. Can you please pick me up? This is really strange. And I didn't really know what to make of that moment. And I guess it took about 3 to 4 months until I started actually actioning that thing that happened. And so what I did was I dropped everything in my life. I broke up with my girlfriend at the time. I quit my job. I deferred uni, and I ended my business. I had a clothing business at the time. So I dropped 4 major things out of my life, and I took 6 months to rehabilitate my brain, because prior to that moment I was depressed from taking all the drugs. My brain had fully rewired itself. So I could only feel happy when I took those drugs. I could only read a page of a book when I took those drugs. And so I had this moment where I realized that the drugs were the issue. And I spent that 6 months to kind of just chill out and start learning about my own emotions and starting to learn about mental health. And I was like, whoa, this is incredible. As my brain was healing and as I was learning about myself and other people and how the world worked, mental health, I was like, this is incredible. Like people need to see this. And so I got a few guys together at my place, and about 5 or 6 guys, and we just said, what's the problem here? Why are young people killing themselves? Why is this an issue? We're putting so much money into this problem. So this is about 2018. I got the guys around in June. We said, what's the issue here? And one of the things we realized pretty quickly was we've got all this money being pumped into the mental health sector. We've got all this knowledge about mental health, psychologists and people who are very knowledgeable, but this knowledge is not being transferred into young people. Like there's an uptake issue, and that's from lack of relatability, because young people or just people in general only listen if they can relate to you. And we saw pretty quickly that just didn't exist. So you had these big charities, these big organization, clinics, psychologists that were so knowledgeable, but like it's like holding hands and singing Kumbaya in the park on a Sunday, or like slap a sticker on the back of on the fridge in the workplace. Like it's not connecting. And so we saw that was the big issue for us. And yeah, from that point on at 20 Talk, our whole goal was to be relatable. But there's a whole other story around how that started, but how it went from there. But that's the origin. Yeah,
it's a powerful story. How did you turn that pain into your purpose? Because you and your friends went through really traumatic things, but how did you actually realize that something needed to change and you didn't want to go back and do the same things that you're doing? Because there's probably another world where you continue doing what you're doing, but what was there any decisive things internally where you thought, I can't go back now, I have to make a big shift? What were some of the thoughts behind?
Yeah, good question. For me, like justice has always been my biggest value. Like since a kid, I don't know, my parents always said I was the one like sticking up for other kids, or, you know, getting upset if someone was getting wronged. And I think that followed through to when I was older as well. For me, what I saw was a structural injustice in the way that mental health is addressed in this country. And that was that, like I said before, the relatability wasn't there. So yeah, I think for me, that kind of ignited this justice part of me. And coupled with that moment that I spoke about before, I started testing out this mental health idea, what it could look like by having those guys around and starting to we built a mentoring program for the first 6 months. And as soon as we started launching it, like the impact to effort ratio that we're having was just like a multiple of 10. So slowly by having like faith in this idea, it just kind of expanded and grew to a level that was so not imaginable. So we just kind of kept following it, and it just started to keep growing, and yeah, here we are now, like 6 years later, which is pretty exciting.
What did you initially start doing? Obviously now we're sort of aware of what you do in terms of you give programs and there's so much awareness with your social media, but what did it initially start out as?
Yeah, so it started out as a 5-week men's mentoring program. And the 5 weeks were as follows. The first one was introduction. So we just got to know the person, which is in a 1-hour session. The next one was on direction. So where are you going in life? The next one was on identity. Then we talked about relationships. Sorry, the importance of intimacy, how to have vulnerable relationships, and then the final section was on escapism. So when you don't have a direction in life, when you don't know who you are, and you don't have intimate relationships, what are you resorting to? And generally speaking, that would be drugs and alcohol, social media, porn addiction, things like that. People are filling their cup up with those kind of things. So we teach people about why they're doing that and how to kind of focus more on, self-reflection and, direction, where they're going in life and who they are, identifying that.
Was that through your own experiences? Like, did you guys all relate to the things that you were teaching personally?
Yeah. So for 6 months, we kind of got together and brainstormed different concepts. And at that time, I probably read about 10 to 15 psychology books when I had no knowledge before. We're just so hungry to learn more. And what we noticed in all these different books that we were reading was that these themes were popping up, direction, identity, relationships. And so we wanted to make that the core approach for young people.
Do you think with the mental health space back then, potentially now, there's too much focus on treatment rather than prevention and awareness?
Yeah, for sure. That's a big question. So I'll start with the awareness question. Prior to COVID, mental health awareness was starting to grow, but it really just went crazy after COVID happened, and mental health has just been talked about everywhere now. There's lots of different organizations, podcasts, media talking about mental health, and it's become this big thing. And now we know mental health is an issue in Australia. We're pretty aware of it. What I see as an issue is there's not enough follow-on resources, like conversations like this or education to help people take the next step. It's so easy to start an awareness charity. All it really is a marketing organization, and you just say, talk to your friends or whatever. And that's really easy to do, and you can be really effective, and you can help a lot of people. But what do you do after everyone's aware of it? It's that the easy part's done. It's this next part, which is like the integration of education, which I think we're struggling with to reach the same amount of people that we did reach with the awareness piece. In terms of focusing on intervention and crisis management, one thing that we realized pretty quickly was, prevention doesn't really get any funding. So we're talking about health promotion, we're talking about this education that I'm just mentioning. 98% of government funding gets put into crisis management and intervention from the Mental Health Commission, and prevention only gets 2%. The reason that is because it's really hard to measure the effectiveness of preventative campaigns, because when you're monitoring intervention and crisis management data, you can track how many people pick up a phone to Lifeline, or you can track how many people go into a hospital bed. But how do you track how many people don't call the phone?
There's no baseline, yeah.
So it makes it a little bit difficult to get funding for things like what we're doing, because it's really hard to monitor. Yeah.
And I feel like in the mental health space, like with awareness stuff, like there's a lot of people who mean well, but there can be a lot of like the virtue signaling of it. Like it's really easy to say like check up on your mates, but then it's like, what are you doing? Like there's a lot. It's easy, especially on the internet. So easy to appear like you're doing good work, but like actually getting to the ground level and putting action in and having a real impact on humans is probably the discrepancy you see now, because the internet has made it such an easy place. It's such an opportunity to connect and help so many people, but it can also, the gap between reality can also be widened.
Yeah, well, I think this is going to be kind of slightly contentious, but I think almost mental health awareness has gone a bit too far recently in that, like, now we're getting people that are like really over identifying with mental illnesses, and they like make that their identity now. It's like they put their mental illness in their Instagram bio. It's like that can't be healthy. And obviously, yes, it's really important that we have everyone aware of it, but like it can go too far. It's just probably good to know that for some people. But yeah, I agree. Like, it's really easy for good-hearted people to latch on to an idea like mental health. And sometimes it can go too far, in that it can be a bit of virtue signaling to try and make themselves look good. There's probably about a third or a half of the people that do that actually are able to provide safe spaces for people to talk. You know, like you said, it's all well and good to say talk to your mates, but can you actually look a person in the eye and provide a safe space for them to speak? Like, that's a skill. That's not just something you just say randomly. Like, providing a safe, vulnerable space for people and giving them permission to speak is really like difficult to do, but it's very powerful, and not everyone can do it without a bit of practice.
Do you think because there's so much normalization of mental health and almost awareness has gone so far that people label themselves and as almost sometimes an excuse, because then they don't have to go through the difficulty of trying to overcome that thing? It's sort of like an identity, it's a label, it's almost an excuse for the things that they have in their life. And it's such a delicate thing, mental health, because you can't almost criticize people, but because there's so much awareness, normalization, it can easily go too far, and it ends up being a burden for them for their whole life.
Oh, 100%. I mean, like I said before, if you identify as I'm the person with anxiety, like, and that's who I am, I'm just not a person that experiences anxiety, like, it would lock you in and stop you from, I guess, growing and navigating and working with that illness. So yeah, it can be dangerous if we're just linking our identity to these illnesses. And I don't know the answer just yet. I think we're very early on in terms of kind of seeing this as an issue, because we were so focused on just bringing awareness to the light that we've now kind of got this new issue. And I don't think many people are talking about it yet. It's just starting to, but we'll see where that goes.
My biggest thing is, I think there's a lot of awareness and people want to be a good friend. People want to do good. So the intention is there, but I think there's a lack of understanding of like how to be vulnerable, how to create safe spaces, because they're not skills that are taught. And I think people only really learn these skills through the experience of the difficulty, but not many people are forced into those situations. There's so many skills that we could all learn that would act as amazing preventions for all of this, for suicide, for these terrible mental health things, but we aren't taught them in schools. People aren't going to go out on their own to try and learn it, because what's the incentive? You know, you would want to have that skill if you knew what it would prevent, or if you were in the future and you could speak to your younger self, but you aren't aware of the benefits of it. And I think schools don't push it. It's probably the main thing.
100%. I mean, the main thing to people out there listening, and what worked well for me, and this is the tool that you only ever have, is the only other tool you always have is yourself. And self-reflection is the biggest tool you can ever have, and that will help you navigate any kind of mental health issue, is learning how to have a conversation with yourself. And that starts with picking up a paper and a pen and writing a journal. I mean, you've probably heard it a million times, right? And we all say journal, but building a dialogue with yourself and learning how you interact with different situations, it's the most powerful thing you can do in terms of your mental health, because you became the critical problem solver in navigating your own mental health issues and navigating other people's issues as well. I think self-reflection is the biggest thing I think most young people are missing. Learning how to start having that conversation. And once you do, it opens you up to so much more.
Did you start journaling after you started 20 Talk?
Yeah, so I bought a moleskin journal, so it's important that you buy a nice one,
Yeah.
a nice leather one. Like don't get a cheap shitty one. Focus on getting a nice one that you want to go to and like write in. Get a nice pen. And for me, I did that. I think my dad bought it for me. He's a big journaler. And what I did was every morning at like 5 a.m., I would go down to like a park bench and I'd write for a couple of hours. I'm not saying do that to everyone. Like that's a bit unrealistic. But even just writing once per week and not having any form of, I guess, structure, just writing about what you're feeling and how you can navigate a certain situation, that kind of comprehension with yourself is just going to allow you to navigate the world so much better, because we don't often put all of our thoughts that we have racing through our head. There's a million thoughts that come through. And by kind of streamlining that into a page and an action and a process and connecting those thoughts into action, like it actually gives us direction and it gives us more knowledge about ourselves, because all these thoughts just wandering around in your head, like it's nothing until it's put into an action or a process. Yeah.
I also think we don't understand ourselves as well as we think we do, because there's such a power in introspection and thinking, meditation, journaling, and connecting the dots in your lives and, why things happen, why you react certain ways. And I think that, coupled with the fact that we numb ourselves a lot with difficult emotions, is the reason we have so much disconnection from within. Which makes it incredibly hard, coupled with the fact that most people aren't equipped with the skills to reach out for help, and most people aren't equipped with the skills to receive help. So it's no surprise that mental health is such a big issue in society, is because we've got a disconnection within and a disconnection outside of that. So it's like you have to solve one or two of them.
100%. And I think what we're seeing a lot of at the moment is a massive lack of community in this modern age. We're living the way, at least Perth is structured, is that we have our little houses that we live in, and there's not much interaction with neighbours anymore. We sit inside with our phones once we get home from work, lay in our bed and just scroll on Instagram or TikTok, maybe get up for Uber Eats or a microwave meal now these days. And what we're seeing now is, because of that, people are starting to feel really, really alone. Obviously, we're so connected, but we feel alone, and young people are feeling as alone as ever. Like, they have the highest cohort of loneliness, which is young people. And this lack of community is really destructive for young people, or just people in general. And that's why we're seeing things like those swimming groups like Cold Nips and Seagulls and the run clubs and things like what you're doing at Medams. Like, they're doing really well because people, like, we're built for community and we need it. So now that there's this kind of regular community spaces that are opening up, people are just like flocking to them, because there's been nothing for the last few years for them to go to. So it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, people crave connection, which is something we definitely lack. Do you think schools could do more? I don't know personally why there's not such an... We all know the impact of mental health now. The government knows it, the people know it. I don't know why there's not more things being taught in schools. Even basic skills like, or maybe there is, I'm not too sure, but listening skills, basic human skills that we sort of lose because of the dynamics of the modern world. Even in things like high school, you have people come and talk, but it's like, it's the actual fundamental skills that we don't. I think we have people come in and talk about awareness and stuff, but what's the point of, you can know something, but if you don't know how to do it, you're not going to be able to execute on it. So I think there's not enough practical, real fundamental skills being taught about how to communicate what you're feeling and also how to receive that, the two-way communication side of things. And that's where there's so much awareness, but the numbers aren't really dropping.
Yeah, 100%. I think that I read this report from Smiling Minds report, which is a big mental health charity on the East Coast that do these big reports. Same with Origin. I think what they said, they've called for a review on how mental health is addressed in schools, and I think what they're saying is, yes, we've had these speakers come in and do a speech, once every 6 months or something to the students, and that's great. But what we actually need is like a comprehensive structure which teaches communication skills and mental health that's actually like consistent, just like we have a normal class. Because if we put so much focus on, economics, maths, English, those are important factors for success, but probably only, I would say, like 30 to 40% of what I think personally, 30-40% of your success would come from like how well you do with your grades, but like 60% of your success is probably to do with your social skills, your ability to navigate like situations, your own mental health. Like, how common is it to see, the person at school that didn't do well with grades, they're now like killing it? It's probably because they've had more of like a critical thinking, better social skills, more open-minded. So I do think things need to change with the structure of schools. There is some great kind of programs already out there. But yeah, the more needs to be done. We would love to do more in schools at 20 Talk, but yeah, we're still small and we just want to bite off the 18 to 30-year-old bracket for now before we kind of start jumping into schools, because that's a big jobby.
How have you found getting people interested to talk about mental health? Obviously, it can be a tough conversation. There's a lot of friction involved for people to engage talking about mental health. How have you found along the journey of 20 Talk being able to make these conversations more inducive for people to engage in more? I don't know. There's people are so scared when you bring the word mental health. They almost like tighten up and they're like, oh, it's not for me. I don't know. That's the vibe I get from a lot of the people I've interacted with. How have you sort of managed to make it more of a, not enjoyable, but like an easy to converse topic?
Well, there's two types of people that want to talk, that we will talk to about mental health. The first cohort of people, when I've done hundreds of interviews over the years, and these kind of people would die to be on my podcast or to jump into the studio. They just really want to talk about it. And to me, they talk about being vulnerable, but a lot of them actually aren't being vulnerable. They're just like almost want to put on a bit of show or intellectualize vulnerability. There's a lot of intellectualizing of vulnerability that kind of happens where they know what to say to kind of make it sound good, but it's actually not being vulnerable. And then you've got this other cohort of people that also we would engage with, and they're kind of a little bit iffy to talk about it. That's where you get the real gold nuggets, because if you sit with them for like 30 minutes prior to an interview or a podcast or whatever, and just get to know them and get them comfortable. Like, a good interview for me is always about sitting with them for like 30 minutes and making them feel comfortable. Once you've kind of broken past that barrier of like psychological safety, they feel comfortable with you, that they trust you, then they'll be more open. And that's when you find all these gold, because in that moment, that's true vulnerability. That's not intellectual vulnerability. That's them being really raw and kind of like, nervous and vulnerable, which is where you get those gold moments that we kind of look for.
Why do you think people would want to intellectualize vulnerability?
I think, well, obviously we've been told that vulnerability is really important, and it's really easy to kind of pick up on well, at least for a lot of people, it's easy to kind of pick up what vulnerability looks like on the surface. But sometimes I don't know about yourself, can you sense when someone's being truly vulnerable?
Yeah.
Or if they're just kind of saying something to look vulnerable?
Yeah, totally. I feel like
What's your thoughts?
okay, throw it back to me. I think I can tell based off the non-verbal cues. So body language, tone, that's the things. And I think we pick up on that innately, and you get that intuitive feeling of like, do you really mean that? Or like, wow, like there's tension, there's apprehension in the voice, and there's a disconnection between words because they're really thinking about it. They really care, that they're trying to articulate something that's so deep and meaningful to them, but they don't know how to put words to it. But if they're intellectualizing it, like it's really easy to
just rolls off the tongue.
Like, oh, this was so scary for me. And like, just like, you know what I mean? You can see that there's a script and they've rehearsed it. But I mean, I don't know that I can just sense it.
100%.
That's, I don't know. I think people intellectualize it, but I think they want to be vulnerable. But this is my thinking. I reckon I've been in that space before, but that's because I've been a massive overthinker, and I think overthinking is like a coping mechanism for underfeeling. So not being in touch with your emotions. I struggled a lot with emotional regulation. I didn't know how to actually feel things, like feel feelings. I used to use my mind because I was really smart, that I could just use thoughts to play out this vulnerability in my head and just avoid feeling. So it was my coping mechanism. So I think a lot of people who are smart use the intellectualize it because they're still trying to escape from that, from actually feeling it. So the intention is to be vulnerable. They want to connect. They want to be themselves, but their default is that script, is that overthinking, and they still are so disconnected from their feelings that they're still not be able to go on that. They need to go on that journey of introspection and figure out how to get in touch with their emotions, because that's what I had to do to learn it, because I used to intellectualize my emotions, but it's just a habit to default. It's the way you've always thought. It's the way you've always dealt with difficult emotions.
Yeah, it's certainly challenging. That's something I've seen a lot more of, and something I probably experienced myself as well. You know, having to say my story over and over again, you kind of it does roll off the tongue a little bit more than it should. And I think maybe that's a bit of an issue.
How do you find that? Like, because you speak so much about the same things. Like, this is something I've noticed with mental health, because you're regurgitating it because that's your purpose, that's your role. Does it ever, like, you almost just becomes like automatic, but like you almost from that those really painful early experiences that you had, there's such a manifestation of what you do that's sprouted from those original traumas, that it's almost become not disconnected, but like, because there's such a big manifestation of what you're doing, every time you talk to someone about it, everything you're saying, everything you're doing, like you're not always mentally thinking about, like, it's just,
I think if I was mentally, you know, emotionally connecting into that moment every time I had to say it, it would probably be very, 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 very challenging for me. I think for me personally, it's about connecting to those moments, you know, in my own time, in special moments. For us, like we have to say our story a lot, and you know what? I actually don't tell many people that other story. By the way, like that's probably 2 or 3 people ever, or in public, 2 or 3 people have ever heard that story. But I protect that story because to me that's very personal, and a lot of people wouldn't really understand. I think a lot of people kind of get a bit freaked out as well about spirituality in the modern day. It's not something that's talked about anymore. But I think if I had to say that second story all the time, I don't know, it might affect it a little bit. So I kind of like to reserve that for special moments. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like because there's so much talk like about mental health, and it's become a very semantic thing. Like there's you read a lot of things on the internet. Like I do a lot of reading about this space and I write a lot of things. But words aren't feelings. And like actually taking a moment personally to be like, fuck, I've also got to deal with my own stuff. I actually got to feel like it's really, because I just get in the habit of intellectualizing my emotions. So actually continuously learning, like it's a feeling, like mental health is a feeling based thing. Like your mental health is all about feeling. So it's really easy to have conversations and get really deep and philosophical, but we can't sort of lose the crux of what that is, and that's a feeling based thing.
Oh, 100%. And for me, that's something that's been really challenging for me to navigate when you throw running a business into the whole mix, and that just complicates things by a factor of 10, because we're now focused on trying to not only help people where we can through our, training, through our interviews. It's actually trying to keep the lights on for a charity and for a company and to pay staff. That's been really hard because it's taken up a lot of our focus is to, how do we make this business sustainable? And oh my gosh, that's been very challenging. That's kept me up for a lot of nights, kept Lockie up for a lot of nights. We've only just kind of broken through and got to a point where we're in a more comfortable space, but there's a lot of years starting 20 Talk where it was pretty dicey in terms of finances. But yeah, I think for us, we always knew it was going to work out at 20 Talk. It was a matter of like when, not if. And I think if you adopt that mindset with anything you do, like whether that's a podcast, a sport, or a business, like you will eventually succeed. It's just a matter of time. It's the consistent people that I think do well, that build it over time. But yeah, 100%. Like navigating, still learning how to be emotional and connecting to people in an authentic way when you've got like the stress of, getting money in the door to pay your bills. It's pretty hard to do. It's something that I guess we struggled with for a few years. Yeah.
What's that journey been like of 20 Talk? It's such a amazing thing you're doing, but it's like you're also trying to build a business. You're also trying to make it sustainable so you can keep doing it. How's that journey been from the start, and how's it sort of evolved and changed your relationship to the things you're doing?
So I think a lot of, and this is the kind of mindset I've always had with businesses, and I've always really loved business. Like that's actually probably one of my biggest things. It's just I love business. It sounds just strange, but for me, there's a lot of good ideas that people have. A lot of people with really big hearts that have great visions for the world, and a lot of those ideas can die because they don't have the kind of structure to be able to scale an idea to help a lot of people. And for me, the way I see business is, and the kind of, I guess, natural attraction I've had to it is, it's an opportunity to help a lot of people in a big way. I say we've got a big issue, which is mental health in Australia, and it's going to require a scalable solution. So it needs to be structured, it needs to be scalable, and it needs to be sustainable. And I guess for us, focusing on, I guess, taking our time to take the business a little bit slower and to focus on programs and fundraising initiatives that were both impactful and sustainable, and having a long-term vision that was able to help us kind of achieve more. So if we focus purely on events, which is what we used to do a lot of, these big music events where we got people in to talk about mental health, there was lots of sharing and vulnerability. If we only ever focused on them, we would never get to the point where we are now, because they were impactful, but they weren't impactful and financially sustainable. So we had to turn them down a little bit and focus more on training, which we could, I guess, train up mental health. We can train up organizations in mental health training, but then we can also do it for free for young people. So by adopting that model, we're able to create a revenue stream that's sustainable, which allows us to help more people. And same thing goes with the media. I guess we've got like across TikTok and Instagram now, it's about 60,000 followers. And by putting energy into media, with what little resources we had, which wasn't much back in the day, we were able to scale that impact significantly, because there was no cap on how many people we could reach. And through exposing these vulnerable stories with thousands of people, if not millions, that in turn kind of gave back to 20 Talk through people starting fundraisers and wanting to donate to 20 Talk. So it always kind of worked out well for us in that area. So we were running 18 different programs at once, but we cut it all down to two different programs, which is we do free training, mental health training in universities and TAFEs. And then 2, we do, I guess, a mental health media company where we do podcasts and interviews in our studio and kind of scale them online through organic posting and through paid advertising. Yeah.
What have been some of the biggest challenges in terms of since you started 20 Talk, in terms of whether it's a business, the personal things that you've had to overcome? I'm sure it's been a 6-year journey. I'm sure it's like you look at it now and you think, oh, like you guys are killing it, you're doing well, things look smooth. But 6 years is a long time. Like I feel like I've been in this podcast forever and it's only been 18 months.
Yeah.
What have been some of the road bumps along the way that you've had, things you've had to figure out, whether it's with your team members and all those sort of things?
Well, there's a lot. I can just say a couple that, pop out as I say them. For me, one of the issues that I faced was when we first started 20 Talk. I guess 2 years into 20 Talk, I was working in a different job in construction, and it was going, that was going okay. But we're kind of at this point where 20 Talk was starting to do a lot better, and it was a kind of all-in moment where I just decided to quit my job, and Lockie decided to quit his job too, and we were living off like, we call it the baked bean phase of 20 Talk. We were living off like peanuts. I was living out of home as well. But we had to kind of almost, this is going to sound really bad, we almost had to burn ourselves out for success. We had to kind of work 6 days a week, running our programs, figuring out ways to make the business sustainable for about a 6-month period, maybe a year period. We were just busting our ass, doing all these programs, helping people, running fundraisers and trying to find a way that we could pay ourselves to do this. And it totally screwed with us internally, like burnt out, like it affected my relationships. I was like forgetting everything because I was so burnt out, like leave my keys in the ignition like 10 times a day. Couldn't remember people's names. Like my brain was just had been maxed out from dealing with all this emotions from different people. Obviously I'm having a lot of pretty full-on conversations, the same with Lockie as well, but then also having the stress of the business. It was really tough, and it affected a lot of my relationships, like to a point where people were like, something needs to change properly. Like the board of 20 Talk was like, this is not good. Like this is really not good. And yeah, affected my personal relationships, broke up with a partner at the time because I wasn't able to contribute emotionally into the relationship. And that was really challenging for us, but fortunately that period of burnout actually, by us working really hard in that point of time, it actually did get us over the line to a point where we could do it more sustainably. I would never really, it sounds really bad to kind of encourage like the hustle culture, and I don't ever want to like push that as a long-term thing, but actually sometimes you have to go like pretty hard for a short amount of time if it's for like a long-term goal. And so looking back at that kind of 6-month baked bean period, there was a lot of sacrifices that we had to make, but in the long term, it's helped us to kind of get to where we are now. So that's one. What's another one, that a lesson that we've learnt over the years?
What have you learned about social media?
Social media, it's an extremely powerful tool that can be used negatively or positively. And it can be a very dark place, and it can be an addictive trap and a hole for a lot of people. But for us, we wanted to be the little piece of light in that space that provides people with some form of hope through the stories of people that have suffered and have been through a lot of pain. Our whole thing was about providing these relatable stories of people that have suffered horrible things and have kind of come out of it or are coming out of it, and we teach them, teach the audience, I guess, strategies and how to integrate their lessons into their life. I think media has been really, really powerful for us, and for us, social media is constantly evolving. No one strategy you do, I guess, continues to work. You always have to change it up, which is a little bit frustrating. But by being consistent and trying different strategies, we were able to grow it quite significantly. It was good. Yeah.
How's it been to do this alongside one of your good mates? Like, this whole thing, like, it's been a journey you've been on with other people. It's not just been like a solo adventure. Like,
100%.
for example, at the podcast, like, I do this myself. Obviously, I have good support from people, but it's such a individual adventure. How's it been to do the 20 Talk thing, but with especially the co-founder, but also the other people involved as well for like a common purpose?
It's been such a beautiful journey working with your friends, with your parents, even with a board, to have a joint vision around what you want to achieve and to actually go out and do it. And the bonds that I've built over the years, we had 18 volunteers at one point, and we would have these amazing like dinners every month. We'd go out into the community. We had this Facebook chat group called 20 Talk Community Activism, and we'd just brainstorm different ways that we could help the community and with their mental health. And every month we'd come together and just do a new, I guess, activation. And we did that for a few years. But like any, I guess, vision or any strategy, there's always challenges working with your friends, working with family. But I think that's really beautiful in a way as well, like learning how to overcome these struggles, because there's always going to be like these conflicts, right? You can't ever escape it. And a prime example of that is me and Lockie. Like, we're born on the same day. We went to school together. We're very different, but we're also very similar. And I think, over the years, we've had a beautiful partnership in that, I'm probably more like creative person. He's probably more like get shit done, and that works really well for us. But we've had moments over the last 6 years where we've had to be very vulnerable with each other and like have very, very awkward conversations. Like not awkward, but like difficult. And it almost feels like we're like dating. Like that's the kind of amount of time I spend. I spend a lot of time with him, like every day, like weekends, and very raw conversations with people, business pitches to very wealthy people. Like, we share a very special bond, and it's such a beautiful thing. But I think what makes it work is we treat it like it's a romantic relationship. Like, when there's an issue, we put it out on the table and we work through it. And we do expect that hard things will arise. And yeah, I guess that's just a part of working in mental health, is you have to be prepared to have a difficult conversation. And if we can't do that with each other, then how are we meant to do that with the rest of the world? But it wasn't always that easy for us. That was skills we picked up through having some mentors, which told us, having hard conversations makes easy conversations. But yeah, it certainly hasn't always been a pretty ride with 20 Talk. And I think an issue I see is like people see 20 Talk on social media and all the stuff we do, and they just think it's like, this big organization, everything's perfect. And it's like, people think we're a lot bigger than we are, but like, we're just people, and there's mistakes that we make, and there's issues that we have just like any other person. But that's not always seen. Which is something I probably would like to share more of. Just kind of getting behind the camera and sharing those moments is probably not something I've always felt comfortable doing, but I think there is probably a lot of value in it.
So what do you had to sacrifice, and what would have been some of those challenges that you don't see? Because it's so easy to look at, like I said before, like you see 20 Talk, it's massive, they've got a big following, they've done it for years, everyone knows has heard of them, they must be killing it, like they've got it figured out. But there's always more that meets the eye. Like, there's the long hours, there's the burnout period you went through, there's the creative issues, there's the working with people, you're trying to finance it, you're trying to come up with new things, you're trying to make it sustainable, all these things that you don't see that you're having. Is that ever like almost stressful, in the sense that like, the perception that people have is that you have it all figured out? Or are you so sort of wavered by other people's perception? Because I know for me that like, if people think one thing about you and then internally you're struggling, it can almost put that pressure on you. You're like, I have to conform to that perception now. Like, and then there's almost like resentment, shame around those feelings.
That's good.
What's it been like for you?
I think, at least for like probably Lockie and myself, like imposter syndrome was a big thing that we experienced. Because the business grew faster than we were able to probably handle, in that at the start we were representing a small group of guys, then we started representing women, and then we started representing everyone, and we weren't really equipped to kind of handle that growth for a while. And so we really kind of, I guess, felt this imposter syndrome about being involved with 20 Talk. We're not psychologists, we're not counselors. I've got a property development degree. It's like so irrelevant. And so we did struggle initially, thinking that we weren't the right people. At least for me, I can't speak for Lockie, but over the last few years, we've really kind of come to be a lot more confident in what we're doing, because if we're not out there helping people this way, who is? And there's not many people doing this kind of stuff we're doing. And so I think we've kind of built a stronger confidence to kind of understand that we are the right people for the job, because we're not afraid to try, and we're not afraid to make mistakes. I think people probably do have a perception that, maybe it is all, it's a perfect growth trajectory and things just work out. But we never really expected that to happen. And we never really felt equipped, but we just kept going, and it just started to work out.
Really want to know, you've had so many conversations with people along this journey, sure, many vulnerable conversations. How do I have a hard conversation?
Have a hard conversation.
Yeah, what are some skills that we can learn? Because I feel like we talked about it before, like that's saying we're not very skilled in, but I think there's a few fundamental things with navigating difficult conversations that people probably aren't aware of that I've learnt personally. But I'd like to hear your take on it first about ways to approach a difficult conversation as either the person who's, from either end of the spectrum, whether you're the one reaching out to help or receiving it, but then also you're both involved in some issue. Yeah,
it's a very good question. I mean, you should definitely get my dad on the podcast. He actually does a training course on difficult conversations. Really? Yeah. But I think for me personally, if you want to have a difficult conversation, it's about preparing yourself with the knowledge. Like, what am I actually going to talk about? I need to actually understand what I'm about to say very well before I have this conversation, because in some ways you have to be a little bit assertive. So to be assertive, you need to be confident in what you're talking about. So prepare yourself about what you want to talk about. So that's important. Secondly, it's about finding like a safe space to talk to someone. So, you're not bringing it up when there's people around. It's like a setting like this. I mean, there doesn't have to be cameras recording you. But somewhere where you can kind of feel a little bit more comfortable. And then I guess just kind of inquiring, looking them in the eye, I think is also really important, and just kind of like expressing, I don't know, it depends on what difficult conversation is. They
change it a lot.
But I think preparing yourself is really important, finding that good space, and then just being honest. You can never go wrong being like really honest, I think. So
underrated.
Once you've created a space and you know what you're talking about, and you can provide examples of why you're bringing up that difficult conversation, and you're honest, I think it usually goes pretty well. And then if they don't actually handle the difficult conversation well, having a bit of a plan on how to kind of get out of that conversation and not letting it get into like a point of anger or extreme distress.
What I've sort of picked up on the journey, I think a massive one is defensiveness. Like, it's so easy when you hear someone saying something. I think we personalize a lot of things, and we've got to understand that whenever someone's speaking, it's from their perspective. It might be misguided. It might be fueled from their insecurities. And it's really like being able to actually listen without judgment. So swap judgment for curiosity. 100%. So we place judgment on what they're saying, we get defensive, but be curious, like, why do you think that way? Why do you feel that way? Why did you come to that conclusion? You'll learn a lot about them and the issue itself, and actually get to the core of the issue, because often you end up having a fight about how you react to it. So sometimes you have a problem you come to someone with, and then you start name calling, and then you're sort of just, the only thing you resolve is you just apologize to each other for like the way you reacted, but you didn't actually solve any issue.
Yeah. 100%.
So that safe space is important, and just like listening, because there's no such thing as a universal truth in terms of everyone's got their own perspectives. It's I had a bloke on the podcast, and he said it's all true. So whatever someone thinks, it's their truth. It's what they understand. So coming at it from that curious angle, you can actually change people's perspectives. But if you don't fully understand why they feel a certain way, why they think a certain way, it's going to be really hard to change it, because you're just coming from your perspective.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
That's been a massive one.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing in any kind of conversation, and this is especially important with like suicidal conversations, is just listening non-judgmentally. And it's when you throw in those little shards of just judgment is when people's walls just go up. And so that's, it's about, and it comes back to that psychological safety thing. It's, looking in the eye, not throwing judgment. And if it gets too heated, being like, hey, look, I feel like this is getting a bit too much right now. Can we like pick this up when it's not so, there's not so much emotion here, because this is not going to end well. And
also another one I think about is like, it's not about winning. I think a lot of people's egos in conversation. I mean, this is something I've had to really learn, especially in relationships. Like, you want to win. Like, I'm right. No, you're not wrong. Like, I'm right. Like, and just coming, like, it's you and the other person against an issue, like being team. It's about building connection, understanding within. It's not, I don't know, my whole perspective on that has changed. Like, and I think that's so important to go into a conversation. Like, I want to be curious to know why you feel a certain way so we can better our relationship. So if you both come in with that intention and sort of clarity on what you want to get out of this, and try and come in at a more calm angle, the conversations, although very difficult emotionally, because a lot of these things are hard to articulate, they're hard to, there's fear around what you're going to say and what it's going to mean. But if you come in both with that right intention and understanding of, and you can almost talk about how the conversation is going to go. I know it can be even harder, but like I really want to talk to you about this, and I want to get to the core of this issue. So if you have intentions, because I think what happens is there's a quote I love, and it's unspoken expectations are premeditated resentments. I think in relationships, whether it's romantic or with friends, we let things build up and fester for a long time. And then often there's a trigger, we react emotionally, and then a fight ensues. And then it's like, you did this for that long. And instead of speaking about things early on, we let them build up. And then we end up and then the other person gets defensive because like, you didn't say anything for this long. So I think, especially in relationships, like if something bothers you, it's almost like the mental health thing. Prevention is probably the best cure for any sort of fight. Like if something bothers you, it's really good to say it straight away, because things will reappear. And I think that plays a massive role in mental health with everything in life. I think we ignore like the early signs because we think it doesn't matter, but that's like almost the most important time, because it's like, prevention is always the best cure for whatever sort of aspect, whether it's business, mental health, relationships, communication. Like things will reappear if you don't fix the underlying cause.
Yeah, 100%. I especially agree with what you're saying around relationships. I think the relationship itself needs to be the goal, not your individual egos. And I think that's a mistake a lot of people make, is it's about winning. But if we have two individual people that are experiencing the world, that aren't solely just relying on each other, and they go, hey, let's come together and make this partnership the goal, it makes the relationship so much easier, because you can put your egos aside, you can put winning aside, and you can make sacrifices together to actually have a meaningful relationship. That's a good discovery that you've made, and very important moving into kind of mid-20s as you start looking for a wife.
Yeah, I've got one. So
really?
No, not a wife.
So wow.
One day. How have you felt individually since the start of 20 Talk, almost before your friends took their life, and the mental health that you had, the mindset you had, the understanding of the world that you had, the way you thought about things versus now? Do you ever reflect on the disparities between the two, and how much you've evolved, how much you've changed, how much you've grown, and been able to sort of understand that journey better?
Yeah, for sure. Prior to 20 Talk, I was a bit of a dickhead. I was like, I was probably one of the more popular kids at school, and I was the one that really understood how social hierarchies kind of worked. I understand how most hierarchies work, whether that's like sport, business, systems. And for me, in high school, I just wanted to kind of fit in. I wanted to be successful, and my idea of the world was so two-dimensional. Like it was like, have money, have lots of friends,
have girls,
and I was such a dickhead, and I didn't have any three-dimensional depth around who I was, or like why we did things, or like how to help people in a raw and authentic way. I see myself back then as this two-dimensional figure that probably hurt a lot of people. And the only way I was able to kind of shed that was through self-reflection and, introspection, and looking into myself and being vulnerable and asking questions that make me look a little bit stupid, and putting myself around people that were a lot more in tune with themselves than me, and actually looking like a bit of an idiot to kind of get to where I am now. I think a lot of people obviously change from, 17 to 26, but I guess Lockie and myself's journey's probably been a little bit different in that we're experiencing this introspection and mental health every day in our jobs, and we constantly get to learn and grow and experience the joys of mental health, which is pretty powerful. I think we're very lucky to be where we are, and it's definitely not a normal lifestyle we get to live. But we do get moments when we have like a testimonial from someone who's just like seen some of our content or been through one of our training courses, and they're like properly, affected, like properly. And that's powerful, because sometimes you just do it, you do all these programs and you help all these people, and you kind of can get a bit like distant from it because you don't see their faces. When you get a moment like that, when they like properly feel transformed by your work, or you notice like an actual culture starting to change in a raw moment, it's fucking incredible. It's extremely powerful, and it fuels you to want to do it so much more. But I think I need to start tuning into that a bit more. Those moments come up randomly, but I think if I actually wanted to create that connection to the past and connection to impact, I could, if I put more energy into it. I just need to get more present.
What stops you from being present? Is it just like the whole we need to get shit done?
Yeah. Oh, well, it's just so me and Lockie are quite bad for just getting shit done, and it's worked really well for us. But only now that we've sorted out the financial kind of part of the 20 talk, we've actually had a bit more breathing room this year to tune in more into ourselves. Like I said before, there's moments of necessity where you have to, almost work really hard. But now that you've come out of it, there's a bit more breathing room. We can connect back to feeling the impact. We were making the impact before, but now we can do it and feel it, which is beautiful. I think Lockie and myself, like, we started doing a lot more saunas and ice baths, and for me, I've got a lot more time now to do like boxing, and I'm training boxing like most days. And for me, that's getting connected back to myself and celebrating the hard work that I've done in the past, which is now allowing me to have a bit more breathing room. Yeah, I think everyone always told me back then, chill out, like stop working so hard. But it actually needed to happen for a little bit. Otherwise, we wouldn't have probably got to this point.
I always find that interesting. Like, I feel like everyone's story that I hear is part of that story is that grind phase, that phase where they took it so far to make it work, and they always attribute parts of their success to those periods. And I think a lot of us try and escape it in some way. Like, we want the destination, or we want to have the circumstances that people have, and yet we're unwilling to do that hard work. But it is something I'm trying to figure out. It's like, can you be successful without that grind phase? Can you get to where you want to go? Like, would you change any of that? Like, or because like obviously you're so happy with where you are, but like, could you get to where you are in different ways? Like, can spending time on yourself show up positively in the business and thinking, and the power of doing less but actually doing more? Like, have you?
To be honest, I personally don't think we would have been here. The reason being, I was so young. I had to try so many different things. There was like 9 fails with our programs and with our fundraising for everyone's success. So we had to try different things. We didn't have that experience. And through the 10% success of trying all these different things, we were able to make it more of a sustainable thing. If we didn't quit our jobs and go all in, there's a very strong potential that we wouldn't have been able to sustain ourselves, and we would have just given up on the idea. There's so many like cool projects and charities that die after 3 or 4 years, because for 3 or 4 years you can volunteer, you can do it, and that's great, but that's not sustainable. You're going to get to a point where you've got like a family, a kids, and that's going to be the first thing to go, because there's other things, your family and living a life and being able to afford things, that's going to be like important, because you need to put food on the table. So for us, it was like, all right, let's just take that leap, like push really hard for a year because we're young, and then get a bit more breathing room. But I mean, it's 100% it's possible to do it the way you're saying. I agree, it's possible, but it would take like pretty special scenario, I reckon.
Maybe I'm just an idealist.
No, I think you can do it. I'd love to see it, and I think you're doing well. Like, you've been doing this podcast for a long time now, and it's very consistent. 2 podcasts a week is not easy. I do 1 podcast a week, and I've got help, and I'm struggling. So no, I really respect it.
Thank you. What have you found about self-awareness along the journey?
What about it?
In terms of like the way you navigate yourself, the way, because I feel like when you learn all these skills and you're in this space, it can actually be really easy to be overly self-aware, which I don't know is too bad, but like you can be so, you can turn a blessing into a curse when you turn your thinking and your ability to introspect into suddenly like you're overthinking the way you're reacting and all those sort of things. So
yeah, it's big. Like I said to you before, like I'm very good at understanding like social hierarchies and where I sit in things, and like that's caused me a lot of anxiety. So like there's been times where I'm having to do training, talking about anxiety, for example, where I've had like an anxiety attack because I thought I was an imposter and I thought I was going to look like an idiot. And so this idea of wanting to like do well and being aware of like the experience everyone would be having of me on stage, like I can feel what they'd be feeling with me stuffing up and not doing well, and that fuels more anxiety to a point where like I had to kind of walk out of a class when I was training people on anxiety, and that really affected me for about a year. I didn't do any training after that, and Lucky just took over the training because I was just like anxious to get up in front of the class. And it was really funny actually, like I got asked by Curtin University to come in and do like a speech, 1 hour speech on anxiety and panic attacks like a year later, and like I knew it was gonna happen like 3 months in advance. I was like, you know what, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna like conquer this like anxiety attack that I had training with a presentation on anxiety. And so I like practiced a lot and went and did it, and it really did help me kind of facing that fear. I was so aware of my like incompetency in that area that I just ran from it.
Such a power though to actually overcome it.
Yeah.
Or at least try to with evidence. Because
I didn't want to fail. And I think that is something that maybe does drive me somewhere in some twisted way, is this like fear of failure, wanting to like achieve something. I think I need to unpack that with someone, but I think there is something that really pushes me to kind of take this to where the level it's at. And I think, Lucky's got his own reasons for pushing it so hard as well. Blessings and curses.
It's true. It's always, whenever there's a positive, there's always some dark side to it, and vice versa. But yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with, being fueled. I think we think being motivation is the composition of motivation is binary. I don't know how I've come up with that word, but we think it's like you're either motivated by the desire to bring 20 Talk to this incredible level and spread the impact on others, versus you're motivated by the fear of failing and not making it. I feel like there's, people talk about that, but I feel like there's an integration. There's a blend, isn't there? Like,
what's your blend?
There's a bit of both. Like, because I love the whole part of like, of just podcast specifically. Like, I love the whole purpose of spreading this knowledge, meeting great people, having a thing that I really truly believe in, and like that part of it. But then there's the part where it's like, I'm also running away from the fact that like, I'm scared of failing in terms like I'm scared of putting all this effort in and it amounting to just, a thing I did 10 years ago. Like I do want it to be something meaningful in terms of like, I would love for this to, provide me decent financial, like a nice passive income stream along with my other jobs. You know what I mean? Like, and there is that fear of like, putting all this work in for so long and not having that meeting my internal expectations and almost that. But I do focus a lot of my time and attention to the positives. But I feel like when you have that healthy blend, because the fear engine is so much more powerful than the pull engine. So getting pushed away from something that you're scared of can motivate you and drive you so hard. And that's probably what pushes you to, go through those grind phases, is that fear engine.
Yeah, 100%. No, I totally agree. Like, the stick is a powerful motivator just as much as the treats are.
The carrot and the stick, yeah.
Yeah, the carrot and stick, that's the saying. Yeah, why do you think you started this podcast? What's your driver?
Well, I started to like learn from people, but like the thing I find interesting with mental health is I think we try and ask people like why they do certain things, and I'm really self-aware, but then there's always a subconscious driver that you're not aware of. And I started like my conscious mind told me, I wanted to learn from people. I wanted to interview, meet people, share this impact. But I think subconsciously I wanted to be seen. And I think I've only been aware of that 18 months down the line. And you look at it and it's like, I have a voice now to some capacity. Like, people actually care about what I say. Or at least that's what I believe. Yeah. I know a lot more people. I've made so many connections. Like, when I say things, there's a bit of credibility. Like, I think a lot of the time I've lived my life, even though I've been in so many teams, so many crowds, I felt alone at times and I felt so disconnected. And I feel like people didn't get me. I had a lot of emotional issues as a child, and I always felt internally like I was so different. So I think unpacking that through this podcast has been such a great vehicle for self-growth and an ability to connect with people who I truly resonate with, not just people who I've been in because, I play footy with them, but it's like I don't really get, we're not on the same wavelength, or go to school with them, but I don't really, or have friends who I love but don't really see me, and I think being able to meet so many like-minded people, give my perspectives and have a voice has been something I've been craving for a long time. But then there's almost a bit of healing in that. Like, through the journey, you sort of like unpack why that is, and you figure out sort of who you are, and you sort of come to peace with it. And those sort of drivers diminish over time, and then you start to really get pulled by the ability to now connect with great people, create a safe space for people to talk on, and all the positives of it, rather than the I want to be seen voice. But it's partly there. Like, we all want to be seen in some capacity. And a quote I did say some time back was like, our greatest desire in life is to be seen in our true selves, but our greatest fear is to be seen in our full authentic selves. So the thing we want the most is the thing we're the most scared of. Like, we all want to be seen for who we are truly, but I think we put a lot of masks on, we put a lot of facades on, because we're actually really scared of what's going to happen if we do that. How are people going to react? How are my existing relationships going to be impacted? What's that going to mean for my life? And although in most people's journeys, pretty much all of people's journeys, when they start living authentically, in the long run, amazing things happens. But it's that bridge of uncertainty that's so scary. And I think this podcast has been great for helping people navigate that uncertainty, and me learning from people about what they've done through that uncertainty. Because at the end of the day, I think the main objective is to be yourself and be happy and fulfilled in that. And I think this podcast has helped me do that, and it's helped unpack what people do and sort of the underlying fundamentals of that. But I think, yeah, it is a massive blend, the carrot and the stick for me still.
I picked up on one thing you said, like one of the purposes of life is to be happy. Would you like to unpack that one?
Yeah, I think,
because I have a different opinion.
Yeah, I think you can get very philosophical about it, and I think happiness is such a beautiful emotion, such an empowering, joyful state. And I think you hear a lot of people where they say, like, you know, their purpose is to have an impact on people and it's a legacy and all that. But it's like, if my perspective is, if you don't enjoy actually what you're doing, the impact you're having, what does that mean? Like, Tony Robbins has a quote. He says, "Success without fulfillment is the ultimate failure." And part of that fulfillment to me encompasses moments of happiness and joy along the way. And I think there can be a difference between happiness and fulfillment. But I think happiness is that sort of hits of joy along the way that I feel, in terms of like having a good conversation with you, other people. That makes me
smelling the roses.
Yeah, exactly. And taking time to be grateful. I think things like gratefulness and make me happy. And I think there is a massive push in this space sometimes, from like the hustle mentality perspective, where it's like, sacrifice your happiness, sacrifice this, go through the lonely chapter. But my big thing is like, there's no one way to life. Like it's the one you want to live. But I think happiness to me is like, I think because happiness, wanting happiness doesn't mean that you are wanting to avoid discomfort. And I think I always used to think, if I want to be, if I don't make happiness my goal, but I want it to be part of the journey. I don't want to have a journey where I reach Mount Everest one day and I was like, fuck, I didn't enjoy that. I've heard enough times where people, especially like, you know, hear these millionaires and all these podcasts where these guys they've made it to the top, but they're like, I wouldn't have done that again, or I'm not really happy. I'm not fulfilled. I've heard it so many times. So I know what makes me fulfilled. I know what my values are. I know who I am as a person. I don't know how the journey's going to play out, but I sort of know what I want it to look like at its core. So yeah, that's how I sort of see happiness.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, well, I totally agree with that. One thing that I see is that, like, this is just my perspective, it's like happiness is being like pushed a lot, this like pursuit of happiness. And for me personally, like, I think happiness is like an emotion which can be quite like fleeting. It can come and it can go. But for me, like, focusing on meaning, it's like this extended version of happiness, and meaning incorporates elements of happiness, but it also incorporates like moments of sacrifice and suffering. And through that, like, suffering and meaning and sacrifice, there's these like little moments of happiness that kind of get dribble out over time. But through that as well, there is like moments of suffering. And I think like happiness without like the suffering, it doesn't hold as much weight for me personally. I think there's a lot of like value in the kind of dark moments that we have in life that kind of make these happy moments quite powerful. For me, my dad always told me in life, it's like, you've got an easy road in life, or you've got the kind of like a long road. The easy road will get you there quicker, but the long road will kind of like build you a lot more strength. And by the time you get to the end, like, you'll have seen so much more. And for me, that stuck with me since 16 years old. It made me kind of understand that, like, pursuing something meaningful where you have to kind of like make sacrifices, and it's probably going to be a little bit different to what most people are doing. That is where you get this like true sense of fulfillment and purpose. And it's this like mash of happiness and like lessons and learning. And that is what I seek out personally. And for me, I think like if people only pursue happiness in the moment, it can leave people really like scared when shit goes wrong, because like the world is not always a happy place, and the world will throw so much shit at you. But when you understand that's going to happen and you're equipped to handle it, and you can push through it and understand that the pain is like worth something, and that the pursuit of a goal with some form of suffering provides happiness. I don't know, for me that's like the ultimate source of like energy. It's this like, it just helps you kind of push through all these shit moments. And like for me that was 20 Talk. Like it was so many times I could have just gone and pursued something that was way easier and could have given me a quicker relief. But like to see that long-term vision, to push through all that, like those hard moments, and when you look back, those hard moments are actually kind of like your fond moments now. But yeah, it's interesting.
I think there's nothing wrong with happiness, but I think it still has to align to that long-term like
100%. Vision
of who you want to be. There's a lot of research, like psychology research, which shows if you make happiness the objective, you become less happy. Because one, the goal is happiness, so everything you feel is compared up against this ideal. So one, you become scared of disempowering emotions like, you know, sadness, whatever, frustration, anger. Like you're so scared of being that, so it's just this negative feedback loop. Also, I don't know about you, but for me, if I want to achieve podcast success, if I want to achieve anything, and it's just given to me, and there's not sacrifice, there's not a hard journey, it's almost like anyone could do that.
Yeah.
That's what I see the podcast. I'm like, well, if I made 10 podcasts, I mean, I'll give you an example of someone I know and who I had on this podcast. His name's Josh Brown. He did the Bloke to Bloke podcast. He told me one episode of his had X amount of views, just one episode. That has more than I've got accumulated over 100. That's a lot. But because they had such rapid overnight success because of circumstances and his partner, Nick Robinson, but that was one of the reasons they stopped, because it was just such a success straight away.
Too many eyeballs. And
also not sustainable, and that was a contributing factor to why they stopped. Now, I would like to have more listeners, but the journey, the journey itself, like I've done this and I've spoken it many times. Like I don't measure the success by listens, but it's so rewarding that it's not come easy. I think I've also told myself this. Like I've had a childhood where I've been given a lot of things, like, and part of this project, whatever you want to call it, pursuit, has been like this massive, like, I don't actually need results straight away. Like I'm someone who doesn't need to be rewarded for my effort. Like I can show up episode after episode, not have the goal that I have, not have the followers, not have the listens that, you know, I started out and wanted, not have my expectations met, not have people say the things constantly like I thought they'd be saying, not have the impact that I fully want to have. Yeah, there are moments of that bring me happiness, but not have what I set out to do. But I can keep going. I can keep showing up. I can keep putting in the work, because the growth complementary to the podcast is incredible. And it's,
yeah, of course. I mean, look at you now. Like you're very well developed and have been able to learn so much from people's stories and probably learn so much about yourself. And that's a massive asset for your life, for your relationships, for your children. Like that's incredible. That's powerful. And if the podcast just got all deleted today, you'd leave with so much. So definitely worth it.
I think so. All right, is there anything you want to touch on before we wrap it up?
No, that's good. Thanks for listening, and thanks for having me on today.
Well, thanks for your time. I really appreciate it. Thanks for listening, guys. Cheers.
Bye.